Thank you so much. It's lovely to see all of you this evening. Um, Tonight I'm going to be doing something that's kind of like really thinking out loud. And I'm going to simply talk about some of the things that I've done in the realm of what we could call social action, but these things cross so many borders. And it's going to be a bit of a ramble. I had a teacher in school, in college, that I really loved. Her name was Barbara Novak, and she taught. And of course, it was basically American light in how American light is in painting. And she would just pace back and forth in front of some images, and half of the class was really in silence. we And it was maybe the first time I'd actually seen somebody in the process of thinking. She just let us see her think. She wasn't always like kind of, this is how it's going to be. So I have a lot of questions about how art and social action relate to each other. And I think, and um, so I'm going to be raising those questions and hope to hear your thoughts on them, because uh, I'm. It's a very tough topic, really, to see the difference between those two things. And anyway, along the way, I'm going to just also bring a few more people into the conversation in the way of music and play some things by some of my teachers, and they will be singing for you a little bit about some concepts that I think have where art and social action cross, which is in terms of empathy, ideas of freedom, ideas of democracy. We'll also be talking about kind of the elusiveness of language and of words, and how we accept certain stories and just without thinking about them, they become accepted versions of the world. And it's very helpful for me to see how this language works. So in some of my own attempts to incorporate social action into what I do, I'm very, very conscious of the language that is used to that I use to express that. So anyway, I often think that and say that being an artist and being a Buddhist for me are the same thing. Exactly, really. It's just to see things as they are and not how you wish them to be or how they could be or they should be. On the other hand, it's complicated because artists do create things that could or should be. So there are many, many shades of this that are going on here. So what is the right way to approach that? I've been working on a book called The Art of the Straight Line. This is a book about Tai Chi, and it's a book that my husband, Lou Reed, began and couldn't finish it. I mean, it's hard to write a book. It's really hard. But we've been thinking about these concepts and trying to put them into a book to really kind of inspire people, basically, to learn Tai Chi. So it's a whole series of interviews, but the title is always a little baffling to us. So it's the art of the straight line, because Tai Chi is circles within circles, and circles is all circles. And so what is that straight line that he's talking about? How getting from A to B, what does that actually mean? And that's where, of course, the art comes in, the art of the straight line. So it's not really a straight line, can be curving around, bringing you into this concept of the labyrinth, the winding way, the circuitous way. And so there are no so it's where making art and doing social action are a bit in conflict, because the art often uses an extremely circuitous route, and social action, we often use the word effective when we talk about social. Is it effective to do this to get that? Which is the straightest line. So it's a very mysterious thing to think about this trip, and what the goals and agendas are, and how to avoid making art that isn't propaganda, isn't about changing people's minds with a very direct goal in mind. Things change whether you want them to change or not, obviously. So when you think of how to do that, sometimes it can be changing while you're even looking for it. So I'm thinking of a story that you might know of Apollo and Daphne. I have a couple of pictures here to show you too, that are also supposed to jog my memory to saying certain things, because this is improv, you might have noticed. Anyway, in this story, which you probably know, Cupid is he's shot by an arrow by Cupid. Cupid is kind of slightly mischievously shot Apollo with his arrow, with I think it was a golden arrow, to make him fall in love with a wood nymph named Daphne. And then he shot Daphne with an arrow that had a lead tip, to make sure that she only feared and hated love. So Apollo chases her and chases her, and she's freaking out. She begs her father, the river god, to say, please don't let this guy catch me. And so he changes her into a tree, and so Apollo, as he's grabbing what he thinks is this lovely little wood nymph, she's turning into bark and stiff stuff, and what I love about this story is, so anyway, what he's trying to grab is changing as he's grabbing it. And what I love is his own twist on this story, which is that he decided to make the laurel tree that she was changing into his symbol of kind of triumph and beauty. So he turned his failure to capture her into the laurel leaf of beauty. And of course, he was the god of poetry and music. And anyway, I thought it's so great to see someone be such a great sport about losing, and he was a really wonderful loser. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later too, because some of my, when people say, do you think art can change the world? I'm like, I'm very, very ambivalent about this, very, much more than you'd think. But when I'm up against a wall, I would say, well, okay, Bob Dylan, there's Bob Dylan. And why Bob Dylan? Because he was the first guy who wrote about the loser, kind of romanticized being a loser and the beauty of being a loser. And since we're all losers, often, it's wonderful to see that aspect celebrated and treasured. So anyway, oh yeah, there was another guy, not to spend too much time in the classical era, but Apuleius, who he wrote the very first Roman novel that is coming down to us in its complete form. It's called The Golden Ass, and this guy was also about change. And what he wanted to do was learn magic. He wanted to learn magic and practice it. But when he was trying to use it, he was trying to change himself into a bird, but he accidentally transformed himself into a donkey. So the whole book is he sees the world through the eyes of of a donkey, and which is, I actually love donkeys. I'm trying to get a couple of donkeys because I'm very impressed with really their memories. They have incredible memories and more complex, really, than elephants, surprisingly. So that, and they're a little slow, so you're not really sure what's going on. So when you meet a donkey that you haven't seen for a while, they're like, they seem to be drawing a blank. They're like, was it 5 years ago? Maybe you're wearing a yellow sweater then. I'm not sure. And then they're kind of making all of these quite incredible calculations. I have a neighbor, spent a lot of time in the pandemic living in the country, who has two donkeys. And I said, how is it to have two donkeys? She said, well, the only thing about that is they need to have breakfast at the exact same time as yesterday. So if you give them breakfast at 10, and the next day it's 10:15, it's not going to work for them. So anyway, I gave up on that, but I'm going to now show you one of my favorite videos. It's a little YouTube clip. Okay, so it's it's about a reunion of a little girl. Maybe some of you have seen this. It's a really popular one. A little girl who raised this donkey, and she shows up at the donkey pen, and he hasn't seen her in a long time. And here they come, and you'll see what happens as he recognizes her.
Wait 1 second. Laurie, I think you still need to share your screen because I'm not sure we're seeing. No, are we seeing? So
Oh, you're not seeing the
we had
screen?
it before.
Okay, let me see if I can redo that. Let's see.
It should be the middle button at the bottom. There you
Yeah, I have that. And then let's try this. And let's try that. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay. So let's go back to the donkey. Do you see this little cabin now? You do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what you missed before was just a picture of a girl changing into a bush, and you missed a picture of a man changing into a donkey. But fortunately, I'm sure you all have great imaginations, and it's probably better that way. But anyway, thanks for pointing out that you weren't seeing this. Here's a little girl, a donkey who sees the little girl who's, oops, raised him. Let's see if I can make this work. No, let's see, go back. Here we go. This actually goes on and on. But anyway, I love that because of its, the music's a little corny, I admit, but it's pure, it's purity, and it's so anyway, I was just thinking of what it's like to be a kid these days, because I remember that as kids in Chicago, we were often taken to see a lot of animals, and also to try to do things like work in animal shelters, and also we met a lot of kids with Down syndrome, and we were taken to. I grew up near Chicago. We were often carted down on buses to meet kids who had a very different life from ours, who had almost nothing, and so we were trying to share things with them. And so I'm very curious about your own thoughts, and later when we open this to a discussion of if you feel that kids are getting to meet people outside of their own uh, circles, because I'm not sure. I don't know so many kids, so I'm really interested in your thoughts on that, because I think it's so crucial to creating a world that is one that we want to be around in, to have people who learn it so early. They don't have to be taught later. They already know that as children, that they need to help other people, they need to help animals, they need to just be there to be there for them. Anyway, back to these categories of art and social action. I'm going to show you a few attempts of my own to do this, but as was mentioned, I'm in a category that is a multimedia artist is what I use. So it's a meaningless term. Everyone's a multimedia artist, and everyone does every kind of thing now. And but I found it useful because things are get so easily chopped up into little categories. Like you're a painter of a certain kind of thing, and that's all you're allowed to do. You're put into kind of a little trap. And I think that I'm very interested in things that flow over the borders. So, for example, I like really what the composer John Adams said about John Cage's work, this famous work, 433, which is, he sits at the piano for 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence, very well-known work, and without playing, and then he gets up and he leaves. And so John Adams said, it wasn't really that interesting as music, but it was really good philosophy. So I think that once you stop putting things into categories, you can see that they have a lot of energy if you think of them in another way. So I also wanted to just say something about Yoko Ono, because before the pandemic, I was pretty much dedicating all the live concerts I did to Yoko, because we're in such a different moment now after the pandemic. But if you recall, before that, things were really shredding, and so I was very conscious of this. I would wake up every morning during that era, which and thinking like back to a morning right after the election, when it was a very gray, drizzly November morning in New York, and it was the morning after the election. People were like, just, what just happened? The streets were empty. Nobody went to work. They could barely get out of bed. It was just reality was something that we just didn't really recognize anymore. And I'm thinking, why isn't anyone saying anything? And the next thing that I heard was this like blood curdling scream. And Yoko Ono had posted her reaction to the election, and she had screamed for 1 minute. And this was not like an avant-garde scream with all sorts of like metaphorical and art historical hidden meanings. This was This was just a straight up bloody murder scream from hell, and so for years, every morning that I woke up during this era, I was thinking of this scream, and it was so I I often asked people to join in a group scream. I'm not going to actually. I was going to do that, but I think on Zoom, if we just unmuted ourselves and really let it go, so we might do that at the end of today. When we were all kind of can unmute at the same time. So I'm not going to ask you to do that now, but screaming for 10 seconds just kind of is, I have to say, wonderful. And when you prepare for that scream and you think of all of the things that are going on, the number of species that have disappeared from the earth, the amount of plastic in the ocean, all the things in your own life that are so screwed up right now, you have plenty of material to just like, and so anyway, we're not going to do that at the moment. One of the things that's going on right now in New York is very odd. It's there's a lot of things being built, and I can ride from my studio to my house on my bicycle without ever leaving the scaffolding. So I could ride in the rain, so it's almost half a mile, because everything has scaffolding around it, and it's all being and it's a lot of corporations are now moving into my neighborhood. So instead of the little bookstores and bars, there's a 12-story Google building. Very sterile, very cold, very it's I'm going to get back to that sense of gutting cities and what that means, because that is happening in a different way than it's happened in this country before. But I think that's why I like to think of the city as a town. Or in the past, I've done a lot of things at town hall, for example, because it has it's one of these places in which art and social action do converge, and there is, in a genuine way, that it isn't like some self-satisfied thing of like, we're going to make the world a better place, and because often in that kind of with that kind of agenda, the art really suffers and does not challenge you in a way that I like to be challenged. It just tells me what to do in a cheerleading sort of way, and I really I have a very, very, very hard time with works that does that tells you that it's going to be better. Better for who? Like for you and your friends, or what are you even talking about? So this concept of improvement is very, very complicated. I think for me, one of the things that makes it easier to see what's going on is to get away from the city, from the country, from and when I think of some of my favorite American writers who they're people who go offshore, they get away. They're Melville and Twain and Hemingway. They're always like need to get out on the water to see what's going on. So I tried that as well in my young days as an artist, to be an expat, and for one reason it was that I didn't have that many opportunities in New York. The scene wasn't so big, so there were very few artists and very few opportunities. So I worked mostly in Germany and Italy mostly at that time. There were a number of us. A lot of musicians did that kind of route. Phil Glass was the pioneer of that, and he was playing kind of in art galleries there in Europe, and before being able to work in the United States. And what happened with that was after these shows, you'd go out for this big dinner with everybody, and you'd be talking, and you'd be talking to my European friends, and they go, "How could you live in a place like that? The way you treat Black people, the way you treat old people, the way you treat everybody is just, you know." And I was like, well, blah, 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 blah. I couldn't really come up with an answer, so my answer turned into an 8-hour answer of work that I called United States, and I tried to look at this country from different ways of seeing it, and it's always been easier to do that with some distance and a kind of a way to make something that could show you or at least try to see the complexity of it, but always recognizing that it's hard to make such big generalizations because it's a very complicated place that we live in. So as I think has been demonstrated in the last year, of that this is a country of cities and areas and not so much a big coherent group that agrees on things. So and I can kind of see it that way too, really, because when maybe because I'm in this the road that I'm on as an artist are the sort of silk roads of culture. So when I don't say I'm going to Germany, I'm going to Berlin. I don't say I'm going to Italy. I'm going to work in Rome. So, and the same. And as an artist, I have more in common with people in Madrid than I do with people maybe in a town like Tallahassee. But these are, I think, could have a power if we can somehow, as artists and social activists, think of other ways to communicate with people through cities. And I'm thinking too of once I guess it was October of 2001. I was in Frankfurt doing a concert, and it was a solo concert. So after the show, it was kind of lonely. I wasn't playing with anyone, so I went back to the hotel and I was like, oh, this is. Went up to the room. And I was like, oh, okay. And there was a really loud party going on in the lobby, and I was like, this is so loud. This is making me crazy. And I thought, I'm just gonna put on some nice clothes and go down and join the party. So I went down to the party, and it was like these very, very kind of styling Frankfurters who were having the greatest time, and I was, but they seemed to have the kind of weird camaraderie. It was so I said, what's going on with the party? And they said, oh, we're the firemen, and I was like, okay, so where's the fire kind of thing? But and they said, we're doing this as a benefit for the New York firemen, and I was like, who sees themselves as such international citizens as to, in Frankfurt in Germany, think my brother's in New York? So I appreciate that sense of being so cosmopolitan and generous, and I'm trying to think of, like, would New York firemen, if something like happened to someone else, I think we are a little bit more isolated. And so one thing that could be inspiring is to see things in another, perhaps more global way, and not be so so much like that. I was in thinking of town hall. The first thing that I did there was something called the Women's Action Coalition, and it was WAC, and this was Women Take Action. I've been in many different women's groups, in particular, and always with a little bit, again, with hesitation and kind of going, what are we doing? Because the first one was a group of women painters, and the all of the agenda was like, the art world is so rotten. It's just like, men's egos getting in the way, and then how can we get into those same galleries? I was like, wait a second, this is like, we have to think of it in a different way, not as opposed to just doing that. Anyway, WAC was formed in during the Clarence Thomas hearings, and was a kind of mixture of art and political action. And we, I don't know if, like, during those hearings, I remember that there was when Anita Hill was testifying, her face was blurred out with a kind of looked like a kind of bluish dot, because supposedly that was going to protect her identity, which it did not, because everybody knew exactly what she looked like, and that always made us very angry, as if the person who's making this accusation has to be so ashamed and so-called protected, and it's just it's still with us too. When we look at universities who try to look at problems about rape on campus are dealing with, how should the girl be treated, and how can we help her, instead of like, how about go back a couple of steps and see what might motivate boys to do that. So, treating the victim is good, of course, but treating the source of the situation could be good as well. There were problems with this one too, with WAC. This is in the era of Bush Senior, and I don't know if some of you might remember his some of his slogans, like "Read my lips, no new taxes." Okay, so that was something that the Women's Action Coalition wanted to do, which was, okay, we're going to call attention to our cause. We're going to take off our shirts and write on our chest, "Read our tits, no something about action." Anyway, and there was a lot of controversy in this, kind of going, well, do you really want to use your body as a billboard, actually, to call attention to your, don't you think this is, so there are many things that become problematic in a situation like this. I wanted to show you some other things that was, oh yeah, another, most recently I was doing something again at Town Hall, which I've often done projects there, and I had been I had to give an award there, and I came directly from, I think, Lithuania, and into Town Hall, just right from the airport. And sometimes when you have a kind of shock like that, you realize things that you didn't see before. And the talk was supposed to be about freedom, and it was some freedom award, and I was like, freedom, what can I say about that? And I suddenly had this image of coming back into the United States, which strikes you, as a traveler sometimes with a lot of vividness. And I saw something very quickly, which had to do with language, which I was telling you about before, that these ideas of freedom and death are very entwined in our country. So, for example, in issues like guns and abortion, some people believe that guns are freedom, and others believe that guns are death. And people believe that abortion is freedom, and others believe that abortion is death. To take the words for these and you're fighting over terms sometimes that you don't quite understand. In the recent war in Israel, for example, people are going, "This is the law, and we need to follow the law." So my first question in that recent conflict was, okay, which law are you talking about, and who wrote that law? And there was a really wonderful film called The Law in These Parts, which kind of evokes the Wild West. And it's made by an Israeli, and he shows you the guys who actually wrote these laws, and Israel is such a young country that you actually, it's like seeing the framers of the Constitution or something. You're like getting to talk to them, and there they are, and they're against a green screen, so and they're a little bit above you, and then there's another shot where they're looking this way, but behind them the whole time are the Palestinians and the people in Gaza, and they're talking about the law of how to get around the Geneva Convention, because if you're in occupied territory, you are responsible for the welfare of those in that territory, preservation of their education, their health, everything, their culture. That's your responsibility, unless you just decide to give them the vote. So, and they're outlining these laws that they wrote, and it was just unbelievable to see how they were like kind of tweaking it in these ways that were just like quite amazing. And it reminded me of some of the laws that get around problems through language. There is a law also, rabbinical law of there's a problem of, it's against the law to raise pigs in Israel. That's the problem. The solution, you make a platform. So you put the pigs on the platform, and then they're not technically on the soil of Israel. So anytime you hear the word soil, you got to really get nervous, because it's then something other than the land that we're on. Another project that I got to be involved with in Israel a few years ago was something called Breaking the Silence. Also a beautiful project, which was initiated by women in the military in Israel who wrote about some very, very difficult things. They were often had to do very horrific things to prove that they were one of the guys. So they were so horrible that they were not able to even talk about them. So they formed a little publishing company and began to write books called Breaking the Silence. And they're check them out. They're really quite amazing group of mostly women writers talking about what they had to do and why. And I've been involved in also a number of things in terms of the military. One thing that we were trying to do a couple of years ago is try to think of what a reverse boot camp might be, because when you join the army, it takes a while to brutalize you, basically, and get you to just take out a gun and be able to aim it at somebody and shoot. Not everyone can do that, and of course a lot of people go, not for me, even though I'm in the army, can't do that. But you have to do all of the other things that do brutalize you. So, and then after you've been in the army for a while, out you go, but there's no time where you're trained to try to reverse those things and going, you know what? Put the gun down. Think of another way to do it. And when you think of the number of shooters who are in this country who did have to spend time in the military and did not get the opportunity to learn how not to do that, I think that was one of the things that we were trying to do. Aside from town hall, there are libraries, and I wanted to mention this one project, which was in Denmark. Was invited to come and sing in a library, and I was like, why? Libraries are always usually like, you're not supposed to like, oh. So they every Wednesday morning, every single Wednesday morning, thousands of people show up at this library and they sing together. I mean, it's a little bit dangerous because every school kids are always, they know all the songs, but there was something so. This is a video. I'm going to try to go to the end of that. Nope. Let's see. Yeah, and he take you to. So they come down these big escalators and they learn these songs and they just get together and sing. And I thought, what if we did something like this? They were singing this song, "Perfect Day," and they did such a beautiful job of this. And anyway, it's over. Anyway, I just wanted to point that out, that it's one of the things that I thought, what if Americans did something like that? I tried to get something going with libraries after the last election because I was like, well, there were so many things that we didn't talk about in that election that were just had become words slathered on top of situations that didn't were just kind of glossed over. And so I thought, we got in touch with I thought, what kind of, and the internet wasn't working for this stuff. It was just like turning into gossip and arguments. And I thought, what networks do we have in this country that could be based on some ideas that we could share? And I thought, libraries, the major libraries are full of these greatest books. And then there's a network of small libraries in New York. There's huge ones. And so we got in touch with about 6 of the major libraries and said, we would like to see if you would sponsor a national discussion of the things that we just didn't talk about in the elections. And maybe then it could be shared with the smaller libraries and whatever. And they said, well, that sounds good. But of course, we're a government organization, basically. And so it can't be partisan topics. And I said, okay. Let me ask you, so one of the things that we would just like to talk about is in the biggest ways is freedom of speech. And that wouldn't be considered partisan, would it? And they said, yes, that would be considered partisan. So I was like, okay. That was the kind of the end of that discussion, because then you're just going to be talking about academic things if you can't think about basic things like that. So anyway, going to go to a second to an evening in 2011, which was an evening that really kind of changed my life in many ways. This was at Lincoln Center, and I was part of the Occupy group where we did a lot of events and actions. And we decided to do something with, there was an opera, Satyagraha, at Lincoln Center, Phil Glass opera. The Life of Gandhi. And of course, it was a very, very beautiful opera in Sanskrit, and very inspiring. Really, the literal translation of Satyagraha is truth force. So anyway, it was a super glamorous evening, and we had checked with the cities here. We were going to do an occupation there. on the plaza. And then we had kind of conspired with Phil to join us after the opera. We had not expected the police to be ringing Lincoln Center. There were thousands of police, so people came out to protect, I don't know what. So people came out of this glamorous opera, and they're like in Lincoln Center, looking good, and sparkly night, very cold, and then they see the whole plaza surrounded by cops, and they're like, and so this is what force looks like in your city tonight. And then they see this group of people chanting, and we were using, of course, the Occupy sound system, which is this center person says something, and then they repeat things, and they repeat, and goes out and rings into so that everyone can hear. And so Phil came and he read some text from this. And by the way, we were barricaded in, and some of the opera goers who were curious are coming. There's Phil Glass. So they were kind of like lurking around, and so Occupy people and the opera goers are just starting to mingle, and it was really strange. And Phil began to read this text. When your government breaks, incredibly contemporary text. When your government breaks, what do you do? What do you do? Do you just stand there? Do you just stand there? Do you just stand there? Or do you do something? So it was a hair-raising evening, and it was literally changed my life. These are some other moments from that. And, oh yeah, we're changing. I won't go through the little film clips, but we had a number of demos that we did, and then there were a couple more things that I wanted to mention before going into something that I wanted to. Oh, time is flashing by. I was asked to come to Lesbos, an island where a lot of refugees had suddenly flooded into, and to do a concert. And I said, do refugees need music? I mean, like, don't they need like food and how? And they said, yes, but it's really boring in the camps. And I was like, really? So, I mean, I spent quite a lot of time in the camps. One of the things that I noticed was, especially for little girls, this was a real trauma. It was mostly women who had grabbed their families, and they were not with their men. They were traveling usually alone with their children, and so most of these camps were women and children, mothers and children. And I noticed, the first thing I noticed was that the boys were doing very well, because it was almost like, well, they were from cultures that really treasured boys more than girls. And so the boys were, it was like, I'm on a date with mom that's going on for months. It's like really exciting. It's like mom and me, and they had schools for the boys, and they had everything for the boys, and they were like having kind of a good time. The girls, however, were off in a corner, going like this, going like this. And I went to one girl, and I had headphones. I was playing music for some of them because they had never had headphones, and I gave her some headphones, and she started slapping me like so hard. I was like, oh, and I just stood there trying to like stay there while she was slapping me, and I realized this incredible anger of these little girls, and so I stayed there much longer than I thought, because of the I had never seen anything like that. The suffering of of the little girls. So and it was something that I had not expected at all. So I'm learning. I was learning so many things as we went by. Oh, okay. So this is, I was just going to play some music, but uh, of pygmies because the brains need a bit of a rest. I'm thinking about that. But uh, and I was going to say so many things today. Uh, out of time. Really, I really like those things. Um, I didn't say most of the things I wanted to say to you today, um, but it's what's really important to me is to hear from you, and I was looking forward to this uh, dialogue. Mostly, I was going to be talking about prisons because I've done a lot of things in prisons and a lot of projects in prisons, and also I feel that this moment is a prison moment. It's like I don't know if you know those films where like you're in prison, or some maybe a dream of a film or something that, and you wake up and the prison doors open and you're in there and you're like, does that mean I can go out now, or should I go out? Should I go back into life as it was, or so-called real life after a year of being somewhere, someone else? Who even am I at this point? And what is a prison? And meanwhile, this life on the super highway is just going, you have to jump in that stream or not. And so I'm sure some of you are feeling a similar resistance that I have to jumping into that. And I'm not sure I want to or can do it. So um, I'm very curious about how you're feeling about that, and what that and, and some of the things that you might have gotten out of the last period of time that you might want to. Uh, I had especially like some advice from you about and tips if you have some about going back into that, and if you do, what uh, what would be different? And it's a very big question for me. And so so any other things that you would like to say? I know we're almost out of time, but is it okay to go then to that questions and things or discussion?
Of course, of course.
Great, great.
I think Noah's just resetting us so we can all see each other.
Oh, good. Okay,
Thank you,
great.
thank you, Laurie, for taking us deeper and deeper, standing in front of these images and letting us drop in with you.